Hello everybody, Chocolate Guy here, and happy Valentine's Day. This year we're gonna do something a little different. While I love doing big non-Valentine's Day related lists on this day, I've always wanted to do lists that fit a bit more thematically. I'm also in the middle of finishing the second half of my big Owl House Season 1 list, so I decided to make this slightly smaller list, ranking all the classic Nicktoons Valentines episodes. That would be any Valentine's Day themed episode from Doug to Avatar. And to be more specific, they have to be officially Valentine's Day themed, not just love themed. Maybe we'll do some of those another year. With that in mind, there are 8 episodes to talk about in this video. I don't think I missed any Valentine's Day episodes that fit the criteria, but if I did, tell me in the comments below, and I will also talk about them in a future year. With the 8 I found though, we have a good mix of episodes from shows I've seen all the episodes from, and shows I'm a little familiar with, to episodes from shows I haven't watched at all. So there should be a lot of fun things to talk about, especially since I love watching and talking about classic Nicktoons, and hope to make more videos about them in the future. So in this video, I'm going to be talking about my opinions on each episode, going up the list, and if I think it's a good Valentine's Day episode and a good episode in general. And if I've seen the show it comes from, if I think it's a good representation of that show. And if I haven't seen the show it came from, what impressions it gives me about that show, and if it makes me want to watch more. With all that said, let's jump right into the countdown. Here is my list of every classic Nicktoons Valentine's Day episode ranked. So picking the worst episode on this list was one of the easiest decisions I've ever made in my life. It's Cupid Stupid is the only episode of All Grown Up I've seen all the way through. I caught glimpses of it as a kid, and I didn't like it because I thought it had a stupid premise which ruined Rugrats. Watching it now, I don't think this premise is bad and has potential, but this episode is awful. The entire thing is a horrible middle school drama, and there's nothing to make it more interesting than that. In this really grounded show, there being a legitimate magic element to create this plot makes no sense, and they don't do anything interesting with it, or even explain why this kid is Cupid and why he has trouble with his hacky sack. This show also clearly doesn't know how to write teenage or older kid characters. And look, I don't think episodes dealing with kids and teens who are experiencing feelings of romantic interest early on in their life is always a bad thing. Hey Arnold is a great example of a show that has a few episodes that do this in an interesting way, but this episode is just cringy fighting and does nothing interesting with that aspect. Every plot point in this episode serves to lead to more fighting amongst characters over dumb misunderstandings and stuff that's out of their control. That's all this episode is, and it's just so obnoxious. Very few of the characters here feel like real kids or teens, and this is all the episode has to offer. Other than a few decent moments, everything else about this episode sucks. What little of a story this episode has is all over the place, and none of it works. The episode is just the worst middle school drama because very few of these characters actually feel like real older kids or teenagers, and will sometimes say things like going steady, and are only used to show off the worst, most stereotypical attributes of this age demographic. Also, on a minor note, Lil Romeo, who plays Lil Q here, could not act. As an introduction to the show, it makes me never want to watch any of it again. It does nothing fun with Valentine's Day and fails in every way. This is definitely an episode I want to talk about more in the future because there's just so much wrong with this 22 minutes, and I don't have enough time to talk about all of it in as much depth as I'd want to here. It's legitimately that bad, but we still have 7 episodes to get through, so let's move on. So after that train wreck, Love Struck from the Fairly OddParents is a huge step up, but still not one I like. Fairly OddParents is a show I loved as a kid, but haven't seen any of it in years besides Christmas Every Day, which I watch yearly. And this episode did not leave a good impression. But there are some pretty good things here. I think the setup is fun. The way Valentine's Day works in this world, and the way they incorporate the fairies into it is cool. I like Cupid as a character, even though how he chooses who will fall in love is underdeveloped, and I find him having full control over that as kind of weird. And I like Timmy's attempt to get with Trixie. I think that portion of the episode is kind of fun and funny. But that's where the positives end, because I just don't like this story. This concept is fun, but all this episode does with it is make jokes about men and women stereotypes. And this is not funny, and has been so played out in other places, and is really played out here. Look, I know this show suffers from stereotypes and flanderization, all its characters fall into later on, and is probably even worse there than in this episode, but it's pretty bad here. Just promoting all men as slobs and all women as perfect beings that are being bogged down by men. I also don't like how this episode shows that basically men and women can't be satisfied without being in a relationship with each other. I know that wasn't the exact intended meaning or messaging behind these scenes, but that's how it reads, and it's just kind of a weird message to send to kids. Once again, I don't think this is exactly what they intended, but knowing Butch Hartman, I can't be too sure. But once you get past all that, the episode has nothing of interest, because it's just boring stereotype jokes, and every twist this plot tries to take doesn't work because the story has nothing really going for it to begin with, to make me care. And the characterization of everyone here is weird because of the stereotype issues. And the ending is also just really weird, and I'm not a really big fan of it. I'm also not a fan of either of the songs, even if the thought of Tara Strong singing It's Great to Be a Guy is pretty fun. So while this isn't the worst episode, it is a bad one and doesn't make me want to watch any more of this show. There are also much better Valentine's Day cartoon episodes you could be watching, including the ones coming up. So from here on out, I like every episode on this list, and advise you check out all of them, though I do like and suggest you watch some more than others. But ordering some of them was difficult, and surprisingly, Valentine's Day from SpongeBob only landed at number 6. This is a SpongeBob episode I've never talked about before, despite having a lot of positive things to say on Season 1 in the past. So while you can probably assume I don't love this episode, you are still probably expecting it to land a little bit higher. I do like it, even if I don't think it's really that good or anything. This is the episode I've seen the most out of anything on this list, as I grew up with this one. So maybe this is nostalgia and bias talking, but I think the atmosphere in this episode is so good, and does a perfect job capturing the feeling of being a kid on Valentine's Day in a few different ways, which is really cool. It's one of the biggest strengths of the episode, especially the opening scene of SpongeBob and the nice music that plays. I also think the story is pretty good for the most part, and we get a lot of good jokes out of it, along with some standout and really iconic moments. But what holds this episode back is I'm not a big fan of Patrick's characterization here. I used to defend this, but watching it again, it is a problem. He feels more like a plot device that acts differently throughout the episode to fit what the plot demands and tell different jokes. And this could work, but I don't think all the jokes land, and it ends up just feeling really jarring and taking you out of the episode. They also make him more animalistic here, which they do occasionally in Season 1, but it's really prominent here. And it can be funny, and even is funny at points in this episode, but I think for the most part, it really doesn't work here, and I'm glad they moved past this after Season 1. I will say though, I think the reason Patrick is mad is justified because he literally would have been fine with a quarter and SpongeBob gave him nothing on Valentine's Day after hyping up a present for half the episode, but they show his anger off in a way that feels out of character and a lot of it isn't funny. I will also say, while I think the ending is kind of dumb, I do get a laugh at the final comment for just how dumb it is. And that definitely feels like what a kid would say in a situation like this. But it still feels in character for Patrick. With all that said, even with these issues, the main reason I put the episode this low is other than some nice atmosphere that does go a long way, this episode doesn't really feel like a Valentine's Day episode, as they don't do anything super interesting with it being set on that day, and there are other episodes in the show that honestly would be more fitting to watch on Valentine's Day, despite not being exactly Valentine's Day themed. I still like this episode and think it's good overall, but it's not as strong as a lot of episodes in Season 1, and the next 5 episodes on this list just have more going for them. Be My Valentine from Rugrats is an interesting one. If I separated this episode into its two halves, because they both tell different stories on the same day and are titled as Part 1 and Part 2, then Part 1 would have landed below Valentine's Day. But putting the two together, the second half brings the entire thing up a lot. Don't get me wrong, I don't dislike the first half at all, but it is just standard Rugrats. Rugrats is a show I watched a little bit here and there when I was a kid, but haven't seen a lot of. And the first half, like an amount of Rugrats I have seen, it just feels like it appeals to a young audience, and that's kind of it. That's not a bad thing, but it didn't make it super enjoyable to watch as an adult. There are some sweet and funny moments though. I like Grandpa's story and some of the babies' attempts at their plan around that, but overall this half is nothing remarkable and is okay. But I really enjoy the second half a lot. There's a few fun stories going on that are all entertaining, and there's some really funny moments throughout. There's also some weird stuff, like why this one girl looks like Tommy with a wig. This episode also has great atmosphere and does a great job showing off Valentine's Day as a young child and an adult with kids. But I think the strongest part of this episode is how much Chucky cares for his dad and how they show off Chaz's loneliness. It's really interesting, and they do a great job showing all this off, and the ending is so sweet. So overall, I enjoyed this episode, as I think it does fun things with it taking place on Valentine's Day, and it does make me want to watch more Rugrats because of how much I enjoyed the second half. Even if the second half does carry the episode a bit, this was an enjoyable watch overall, and I do like it more than the SpongeBob episode. But I think the next 4 are just much stronger. So I highly recommend the next 4 episodes, as I think they're all great, but coming in at number 4 is Operation Valentine from The Wild Thornberrys. The Wild Thornberrys is a show I've seen very little of and have heard varying opinions on, but this episode was a blast, and definitely makes me curious to check out more of the show. I really like the setup to the main story in this episode. The exchanges the main characters have about Valentine's Day and how they're going to spend it are nice, and do a great job endearing you to these characters. It also leads to some funny moments. And because of how good the setup is, it also does a nice job slowly building up to the twist of the episode, that being Eliza having appendicitis and needing to get to the hospital from their location in the middle of nowhere. And this is where the episode gets really good. While the first half of the episode is a fun setup, and the show having fun with the concept of the Wild Thornberrys episode set on Valentine's Day and the location they're in, the second half is a high-stakes adventure, with a great set piece of Nigel having to fly Eliza to the hospital and deal with different things, which leads to a lot of cool moments, and the episode does a good job making you get engaged in the story, which makes the climax even better. After all that, the ending is really sweet and satisfying, and wraps the episode up in a nice way, giving a really loving ending to its characters, despite not all of them getting to do what they wanted on Valentine's Day. And it just wraps the episode up on such a good and likable note. And that's the best way I can describe this one. It's just a really fun and likable episode. The drawbacks of this episode, though, are that while I like the setup, it does take a little while to get into the great parts of the episode, and while I like the characters, they're not that interesting here. Also, I think the next 3 are just better as Valentine's Day episodes, but this is still a great episode nonetheless. So Love Potion 976/J from Jimmy Neutron is without a doubt the funniest episode on this list. It's not my favorite obviously, but through most of the episode it got a laugh out of me. Jimmy Neutron is a show I watched an amount as a kid, but haven't seen a ton of it since. But this episode is an absolute joy to watch, and out of all the shows I haven't seen all the way through on this list, this is the one I want to watch the most, based off of its Valentine's Day episode. I don't really have a ton I want to say about this episode, other than it has so much fun with its concept. Well, it takes a little bit of time to get going, and some of the scenes earlier on don't have as much fun with this premise, and I don't really like the song in the middle, but once this episode really gets going, it's a lot of fun. Jimmy's motivation for his plan makes sense for his character, and through an accident involving a love potion, seeing him fall in love with Sydney and be smart enough to understand something's wrong, but not being able to resist these feelings is just a ton of fun to watch and leads to some great scenes of him struggling with the scenario. Sheen and Libby scenes are really adorable and also lead to many great gags, and it's cool to see that they still feel something towards each other at the end. But the best part is Carl being in love with Jimmy's mom and being jealous of Jimmy's dad. It's just so funny, and every joke had me dying. Like him taking the cookies, the threats he makes to Mr. Neutron, his monkey beating up Mr. Neutron, and especially the picture he gives to Mrs. Neutron of him shirtless. Oh my god, it's just so funny. And they do wrap up all 3 stories in a way they deserve. And how they solve the problem seems like it makes sense and fits for a Jimmy Neutron episode, and is also a fun callback. The few things holding this episode back do make it not as good as the really strong top 2 on this list, but man, I really did love this one, and this is just a wonderful Valentine's Day episode through and through. So the next 2 are not just amazing Valentine's Day episodes I highly recommend, but they're some of, if not my favorite episodes from their respective series. And coming in at number 2, we have Tak, the Hideous New Girl from Invader Zim. Invader Zim is a show I haven't talked about before on my channel, but one I have seen all the way through, and I like it a lot. It's such a wickedly funny and creative show, and this just so happens to be my favorite episode from it. Well, I would have to rewatch the show to feel 100% comfortable having that take. This was my favorite the last time I watched the show, so currently that is how I feel. But that is a topic for another time. What I can say now, though, is this episode is amazing. I love the setup, and Invader Zim's weird take on Valentine's Day, and they get so many great jokes out of it, and his interactions with Tak. I also really like how this feels like a standard Invader Zim Valentine's Day special, just being weird and funny, and just having an interesting little take on Valentine's Day, and then slowly builds into a more story-driven episode that takes itself a little bit more seriously, while not losing its comedic edge. It does a great job with this, and I wish Invader Zim could have had the chance to expand and develop its world and tell bigger stories more often if it had gotten more episodes. But the story is really good here, and has high stakes for most involved. Zim doesn't want to lose the Earth to Tak, and Dib doesn't want the planet to be destroyed. Tak is also a cool villain with great motivation and an interesting history. It's also cool to see Dib and Zim team up, and they have a lot of fun with that. And once again, throughout all of this, there's still so many funny moments to even count, especially with Gaz and Gur. And the climax is epic, and it's just a blast to watch. The episode is really just Invader Zim at its best, combining comedy and pure weirdness with a grander story to create something truly fantastic. The reason it is not number 1 is because while I love it, if you have never seen Invader Zim, I'd probably suggest that you watch the Jimmy Neutron episode more, as it is much more fitting to watch on Valentine's Day, not being a weird parody, and it's more accessible to new viewers, not being the crazy and weird Invader Zim, even if I think this episode is better than that one and does more interesting things, and I also think this episode is not inaccessible to new viewers. In fact, I think it very much is. I just think that episode is a little bit more. But either way, I do like this episode more than that one, which is why it landed higher. But the bigger reason this episode isn't at number 1 is one of my favorite episodes from any show was always assured that number 1 spot. And that episode is Arnold's Valentine from Hey Arnold. So if you have seen my Hey Arnold Season 1 list, or know a little about my channel, you knew this was gonna easily take the number 1 spot. I absolutely adore this episode, and everything I said in my original review still stands. I'll link that video down below, as I do a good job saying most of what I wanted to there. I'm not going to talk about this one a crazy ton here, as I've already said most of what I wanted to say about it, and we'll definitely be talking about it again in the future, but I will say that this is the perfect Valentine's Day episode that I watch yearly on Valentine's Day, and each year I absolutely love it. It just uses its atmosphere to absolute perfection, while telling a great story that is paced so well and plays around with a fun story trope to get the best episode out of it and has so many jokes. But it still deals with themes that a lot of people can connect with in some way, and I do connect with it personally as well. The idea of some people not being who you want them to be or imagine them to be after you've built them up in your head to be really, really great for a long time, and having other people really surprise you and really connecting with you under certain situations, and the thought that there are other people out there who you didn't expect in your lives that do really connect with you instead is something that I do relate to quite a bit. And the way it shows not only how kids deal with feelings of affection or interest in someone else, but also how Arnold and Helga both want to have someone they can really connect with and help them work through things, and how they're both genuinely surprised that they're connecting with someone who they really didn't expect to, but just how much of a good thing this could be for them, but are kept from fully committing to this because of the roles they both try to fulfill in their lives, especially Helga. It's all so interesting. And some of those scenes, especially that ending one, are some of my favorites of any show. This episode is a masterpiece that looks at its characters and themes in such an incredible way. It's one of my favorite episodes of any show, it's the best episode of Hey Arnold, and is the perfect Valentine's Day episode. I highly recommend you check it out no matter who you are, and it also easily takes the number 1 spot on this list as the best classic Nicktoons Valentine's Day episode, on top of everything else. And with that, the list is done. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed this list and would like to see me make more videos where I rank episodes from different shows with a similar theme, or would like to see me talk about more classic Nicktoons, please leave a like and subscribe. Also, comment down below on what you thought of my list and what your own would have been if you've seen all these episodes. Also, link to a playlist with all the music I used in this video will be in the description below, along with a playlist to all my videos. All the music and images used in this video belong to their respective creators. I'm so glad I got to make this video after having the idea for years and actually make a Valentine's Day themed video on Valentine's Day. Part 2 of the Owl House Season 1 video will be coming next, and hopefully soon. I got caught up trying to make this video kinda last second, and the Hey Arnold Eugene's bike review, and some other things pushed the production of the Owl House video back a bit. Also, on the note of Hey Arnold episode reviews, after the part 2 of the Owl House Season 1 video is completed, I'm going to be making a bunch of those, so stay tuned for that. And with all that said, I'm gonna actually go watch Arnold Valentine as part of my yearly tradition, and until next time, have a happy Valentine's Day, and this is Chocolate Guy, signing off.